I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with Himesh Patel, who stars as Jeevan Chaudhary in the acclaimed post-apocalyptic limited series Station 11. You know what, Himesh? I love this series so much for many reasons, but especially for how it made me feel about these characters who live to fight another day against the odds during a pandemic which wipes out most of the world. You know, just your regular day-to-day stuff. What did you most love about this story and about the character that you portrayed?
I think it's the fact that ultimately, though it deals with um, trauma and pain and you know the sort of end of the world, it's ultimately a story about love and reconciliation, community, art, and celebrating the best things about humanity, and just how art will survive. No, it will survive the end of the world. As long as people are around, art will survive, and it will bring people together, and it will save people's lives. And that's a message I truly believe in. So, it's a wonderful, that heart of the story is a wonderful thing. And for the character of Jeevan, I I related to him immediately as soon as I read the pilot. I had a sort of angle. I felt like I knew what he was about, and I couldn't. It was one of those where I just couldn't wait to bring him to life. I couldn't wait to give it my shot and audition as I did, and then I was given the privilege of actually doing it, and because he was so complex and so interesting and funny, that there was a humor there and a warmth underneath the sort of pessimism and the sort of cantankerous thing that he has going on. There is love, there's goodness, and that was all there in the pilot. That pilot episode was a gift of a sort of experience for me, getting to bring Jeevan to life, work with Hero, Mariah, and especially because we shot that episode in January of 2020, before we had any idea what was about to happen. If to me that experience of that first episode it's got some sort of like force field around it in my mind. It's just like a really special moment where we established the show and I established Jeevan, and I felt, I met Jeevan, and I became him for the first time, and he seeped into my bones, and then I knew at that point that Patrick had ideas of what he wanted to do with Jeevan, and he talked to me about that when we initially spoke, because I think he wanted to assure me, because in the novel, Jeevan sort of is there at the beginning and then pops up at the very end. We don't really hear from him again. And I knew that Patrick had ideas of what he wanted to do with Jeevan and the arc he wanted to take Jeevan on. And it felt so ambitious and exciting to me. And I knew that I'd be able to learn about myself as an actor going on that journey. So
Yeah,
the fact that I did get to do that in the end was great.
just touching on what you mentioned earlier, I love how, in the face of the most horrifying world-ending catastrophe, art lives on. Specifically, Shakespeare in this particular instance, and theatre. It outlives everything and ultimately sustains us as human beings. It opens on a play, and it pretty much almost closes on a play as well.
Yeah, it is. I think, art's proven itself actually over the last 2 years to have been a savior for so many people during this strange time, where you've been locked inside and not been able to socialize. It's the art that has been accessible, such as film and TV and music, has been so important to people. But at the same time, we were made to realize how lucky we'd been to have live theatre and live music, because when that's ripped away from you, you realize just how amazing it is, you know. So to, in certain pockets around the world, to have that back now is really, really special. Like it's never going to feel the same again. It's going to be even more profound an experience now, forever.
Yeah, absolutely. How many people we've heard over the last year or so just saying it's so great to be back. It's so great to be back in person. It's so great to be seeing live theatre, and we'll never take that for granted again. And speaking of, you know, like at first blush, Station 11 might make for uncomfortable viewing, as I said, during the flu pandemic, wipes out almost all civilization. We went through the same thing. We can't help but relate the story to our own lived-in experience. Over the last 2 years. So how conscious were you of these inevitable parallels between our shared experience and the world of Station 11, particularly after production resumed in early 2021?
I think during production, once we'd resumed, I couldn't concentrate too much on the parallels, because I think it would have, you know, spun me out a bit too much. But at the same time, I think it wasn't like I was making episode 1 again. I think episode 1 is probably the one that's veers closest to what we've all experienced. It's you know, it's the beginning of everything. You know, there are some what have become, due to the context that then developed, very disturbing moments in that episode that I am at pains to point out that we shot all of that before COVID arrived on Western Shores. So, you know, it's when I first watched a cut of that episode, which was just before we resumed shooting a year later, it was really, you know, I cried, because it was just, we had no idea what we were making when we made it. You know, there's a scene where a scene that opens on a kid wearing a mask, and we shot that in January 2020. We had no idea. You know, the whole scene in episode 1 where Sia, Jeevan's sister, is walking through the hospital, and she's talking about Tamavir and Tamiflu, and you know, the hospital is in chaos. Again, we shot that not knowing that 2 months later that would be a reality for so many people. It's hard to reconcile that. It still is hard to reconcile that for me, because the chances of something like that happening are just infinitesimal. You know, it's just, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't, you know, so what I had to take solace in was that I knew that the story we were telling was not that. It wasn't mining the pain of living through a pandemic and having everything ripped from you. From episode 2 onwards, it's about how we rebuild, how we find community again when everything's lost, and how, yeah, art will save the world. It will bring people together, and it will be the center point of everything.
Yeah, quite literally. Yeah, I found it so prescient. It blows my mind actually how episode 1, yeah, I just couldn't believe it. I thought this must have been done well into the pandemic, and no, it really wasn't at all. Look, I'm also fascinated about the dynamic between Jeevan and Kirsten, particularly young Kirsten. I think, you know, that relationship is so pivotal to the entire narrative. It's so compelling, beautifully rendered paternal bond that they share, and I found it so authentic and genuine and engaging, and I kept wanting to see more. I'm wondering what was the key for you and Matilda, who plays young Kirsten, in forming that beautiful bond that we see on screen.
It was, on one hand, I can say from my angle, it became so much easier once we cast Matilda, once we discovered Matilda, because she's a very special actress, a very special person, and I connected with her immediately. I you know, she's got a wonderful warmth and a really sharp intelligence, and I was working with another adult. It didn't feel like I was working with a child in any way whatsoever. um and so it was fun to then start getting into, pre-production and discussing these important beats, because it's the beginning of the show. It's the relationship at the center of everything, and I think we were aware that we really need to make sure we build this properly, because if people come out of episode 1 going, I don't really care about them, then there's no show really, so thankfully we had a great script, obviously, and we had a great director and hero who was guiding us. But I think had we not found someone like Matilda, who was so intelligent and brought so much to the table when we were discussing the relationship, then we may not have found our way to it. And we did. I think one of the key moments that we ended up sort of pivoting on was the moment in the parking lot, when they've just sort of done that panic buy again, something we shot 2 months before everyone then started doing that. It's like I'm still staggered by it. But anyway, yeah, we shot that scene sort of midway. It sort of felt like midway through the schedule, but it felt, when we were preparing in pre-production, it felt like that moment was the fork in the road, really, where he's found himself with this child who thought he was just going to drop home, and he now has to make a choice, but he defers to her. He says, you've got to make this choice, I can't make it for you. And I think ultimately he knows she can't make the choice herself because she's a child.
Yeah.
And I think what we landed on was that that's the moment where they basically make the choice to go on together. He asks her to trust him, basically, by he does this strange thing where he comes up with a lie. He knows it's a lie. He knows that she knows it's a lie.
Yeah.
But it's what he has to say to make this legitimate. And we realize that that's basically the moment where he says, I need you to trust me, because I don't want you to die. I don't want to leave you to die. You will die if I leave you alone. I need to trust me. And then I think the show then from that point on goes, in terms of the Jeevan and Kirsten storyline, it goes on to test that trust between them, and goes on to put them through the ringer and see how much that bond can handle, really, until eventually, of course, there is a sort of parting of the ways, but in the most heartbreaking way, really.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think, Patrick and Hero, the two of you just made it really special. It could have been creepy. It could have been disingenuous. I think earlier you used the word cantankerous. I think Jeevan's, that's, as a father myself, like that is something that a lot of people in that paternal space would be like in that moment when, come on, we need to actually pull our head in and do this properly. You need to trust me. We know everyone's dying. Your parents are probably dead, but we're not going to talk about that. We just need to, it's a utility. I just found it was very hard to pinpoint, but I found it so real and authentic. So yeah, great work on that.
Thank you.
I want to talk about 2 other episodes before we go, particularly the ones that you're most involved in. Firstly, episode 9, obviously, Dr. Chaudhry is a highlight because Jeevan's recovering from an injury in a makeshift birth center amongst a group of pregnant women. What do you remember most fondly about shooting that episode? Because it's wild, and it's also quite touching.
There are so many things. I don't know how I can pick, really. It was an absolute gift of an episode for any actor, and I still look back on it fondly, despite it being also one of the most difficult things I've ever done, physically and emotionally in so many ways. But I'm really proud of the end product. I think anything I did with Matilda will always be very, very special to me, because she's just brilliant. But I guess I had already established that, we'd established it a year earlier and then we went on to a year later shoot episode 9 and take that journey to some degree to its conclusion. So for me, the mystery was the sort of onward journey of Jeevan once he is torn from Kirsten, and that sort of thing, which I loved reading. That whole element of the story I was really excited to read because, funnily enough, I became a father during lockdown.
Yeah.
And I remember telling Patrick that I was expecting a child, and he said, I think I remember him texting me saying, "Wait till you read episode 9. You're not going to believe what I've written." And so pure coincidence, really, that then he ended up takes a huge swing. You know, one thing I love about Patrick in his work in general, he takes some really huge swings. He's not afraid to get weird, and it always works. You know, he finds a tone that I just think is really great. And for him to go, okay, what happens after they get to a part is that he gets taken to an old supermarket and it's actually a birth center and they're all going to give birth at exactly the same time. With anyone else, I feel like I would have been like, no. What are you talking about? But with Patrick, it was like, yeah, okay, cool. And this is going to work. It's going to make sense, you know? And so it was really great to sort of go on that journey, and to those amazing actresses that I got to work with for that period of time, you know, Natara Nicodemo, who played Deborah, who we would come to know eventually as Saint Deborah, and you know, so many amazing actresses and who played all the sort of pregnant women, and I think and Tatiana, of course, who played Lara, who we had such an interesting time because it was that thing of going, okay, but why do they end up together? How does he end up attracted to someone who tore him from Kirsten? You know, how do we get to that point? That was another sort of journey that we really had to sort of discuss and go, okay, how do we make that truthful and honest? And so it was really fun to sort of get into that side of the story and shooting that birth sequence with all those amazing actresses, and you know, some of whom were actually pregnant and some of whom weren't, because of course we had to balance it out in case one of them gave birth and we couldn't, you know. So I was so full of admiration because, you know, especially, you know, as I say, the ones who are actually pregnant, because having just been through it myself with my partner and knowing just how vulnerable a position that is to be in, to then come to work and tell a story during a pandemic and tell a story about birth and about life and life's comeback, as we say in the episode. It felt sort of chaotic when we were doing it, and for me it was like the end of this journey that I was going on. And then to finally watch it, and it becomes this sort of euphoric crescendo of a moment where for me, it almost epitomizes everything we wanted to do with the show, which was this story is not about death, it's about life. It's about life finding a way and coming back, and about survival and
yeah,
sort of community.
absolutely. Yeah, you hit the nail on the head with the tonality of this series. It's very hard to pinpoint exactly what it is about the tone that Patrick and all the directors just, it makes it work. My favorite episode is episode 7 in particular. That's one that's really stayed with me. I've seen it a couple of times now. That's where, for anyone watching, delirious Kirsten revisits memories from when she was holed up with Jeevan and his brother Frank. By the way, beautifully played by Navatan Riswan. In Frank's
great actor.
Oh, it's just amazing. So when the pandemic began, and they fight to stay alive, and Kirsten persuades them to stage a play in the apartment. I don't even know where to begin. We literally have not that much time, but I just wondered, what was your key takeaway from that episode? There's so much to unpack. It's like a movie. You could watch it over and over again. What did you think?
It felt to me like, again, it was the first thing that we shot when we came back. Right. At the beginning of 2021. And for me and Naban specifically, it was, and Matilda, but having spoken to Naban about it, I think we feel the same way, which was that we finished shooting in February of 2020 on that set in the flat in Frank's apartment, and we picked up in February of 2021, a year later, in that exact same flat, but this time in Toronto.
Wow.
But when we walked back onto that set, it felt like that entire year disappeared, and we were just back telling the story and picking it up again, literally the next day in story time. And so then we spent these 3 weeks, shooting episode 7 with Lucy Cheniak, who directed the episode brilliantly. She's a fantastic director, and really getting into it, really sort of getting into the reads and beginning the journey and establishing relationships, and really getting into Jeevan and Frank, what's their relationship, how do they see each other, what secrets are they hiding from each other, and establishing all this stuff that would pay off later on. And also, I know for Mackenzie it was really important because she's sort of there hovering as a ghost, as a sort of spectral sort of presence, but it gave her a chance to watch this unfold and establish her own sort of history. And so it really felt like we were all building something together. We were laying the groundwork for the rest of the show in so many ways, and it was a really special time, and really difficult in so many ways. We had to go to places emotionally, some of which I'd never done before, really, and I felt really well supported by everyone, by Lucy, by Patrick, Mackenzie, and Matilda, and specifically Naban. He's a really special actor, a really special guy, and he was really fun to work with and really supportive. We went through a lot during that period of time, and it was nice to have someone like that by my side.
Such a special gift to be able to carry that with you for the rest of your career. Himesh, I wish we had more time because I just thought you're incredible in this, and I love the show, and I really appreciate your time today, and good luck for your next projects.
Thanks so much.